Well, it's been a quarter of a century since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the rise of hope that East and West would unite across Europe.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
The sound that you hear and what you're seeing tonight, not hammers and sickles, but hammers and chisels as young people take down this wall bit by bit.
Tonight at the Brandenburg Gate, it looked like a disco.
This wall has stood for 28 years as the symbol of a divided world, a symbol of oppression. But tonight, East and West Germans have come to the wall to celebrate the end of fear.
25 years later,
New Cold War.
A new Cold War.
Cold War. Cold War. Cold War.
New ice age in relations with the West.
Joining us in the now is William Keylor, historian and international relations expert at Boston University. Professor Keylor, tell us, what has changed since the fall of the wall?
What has changed since the fall of the wall? My goodness. The end of the Cold War brought about an entirely new international order. From the standpoint of the United States, there was no longer a threat from the Soviet Union and its allies in the Warsaw Pact. And for about 10 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, from the American perspective, there was no threat, there was no danger. It was a period of relative peace and stability. And then, of course, on 9/11, a new threat emerged, and that was the threat of Islamic terrorism. So from the fall of the Berlin Wall to the fall of the Twin Towers in New York City, the world experienced an almost unprecedented degree of relative peace and stability.
Now, there's a new threat that we're constantly hearing about from NATO, which is Russia in their eyes. And we saw such warm tones, which you mentioned, between East and West directly after the wall falling. Could we have expected 25 years ago that we would hear even stronger rhetoric than in 1989?
Well, some people are actually talking about a new Cold War, predominantly because of the conflict over Ukraine and Crimea. And I think that it's important for historians to point out that the current tension between Moscow and Washington is nothing compared to what it was during the Cold War, when you had the possibility of nuclear annihilation and a World War II type war in Europe. So let's not exaggerate the tensions between East and West in the current situation.
With that said, why is Russia being perceived as such a threat?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you repeat it, please?
Sure. With that said, with you saying that the threat back then, the risk back then was much more serious, why is Russia now being perceived as such a threat?
Well, I think it's not perceived as a threat to the United States. It is perceived as a threat to the former Soviet satellites in Eastern Europe. That are, in the case of the Baltic states and Poland, members of NATO.
Isn't it NATO, though, that has expanded since the Cold War and not Russia?
It certainly is, no question about it. If you had asked me back at the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall if Poland and Hungary would join NATO, and if the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia would have joined NATO, I would have thought you were crazy. And yet that is indeed what happened. Now, having said that, it's difficult to argue that these countries cannot be allowed to join whatever military alliance they want. So that's the position of the U.S. government, is we didn't force them to join NATO. They decided on their own accord to do so.
All right, William Keylor, historian and international relations expert at Boston University. Thanks so much.
Thank you.